Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the March 23rd briefing session of the Forsyth County Commissioners, and we are briefing for next Thursday's regular meeting on March the 30th. We do have one discussion item today. We're going to hear about the Herb Stout Award, and I'd like to ask Tim Johnson if he would come up and tell us a little bit about it.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board, for the opportunity to bring you some good news. So I would like to first say how much of a pleasure it was to be in Winston-Salem for the GIS conference 2 weeks ago, this week actually. I'd like to commend you on the investments that have been made in the city. It's obvious you put a lot of effort into thinking about that and acting on it. And so I'd like to commend you for that. But I'd also like to commend you on the investment that you all have made in GIS, Geographic Information Systems. It's obvious from this recognition today that you've put a lot of work and money into that, and we appreciate that on behalf of the North Carolina statewide community. So before I present the award, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on what the award is about. So Herb Stout was a Wake County Commissioner, chair of the Triangle J Council of Governments back in the 1980s, and he saw in his vision a way to bring the local government community together through a GIS conference. It dates back to 1987, which is a long time ago, and the technology was new then, and now it's more widespread, obviously, in all aspects of our lives. He felt strongly about the need to communicate successes, communicate issues with each other, and he was the impetus for creating the conference back in the 1980s. He thought it was important to share and to learn from each other. And you can only do that. These days you can do it through Zoom and things like that. But doing it in person is much, much better, as I think you would agree. So I'd like to just recognize the Forsyth Cares team with this award, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. I know you know something about it, but I'll give you the perspective from the GIS conference. The Forsyth Cares effort is an innovative project using GIS to provide information to emergency services personnel and first responders ahead of their arrival on an emergency call, leading to faster and more effective provision of services. Responders are more situationally aware in advance, which is a plus, and being able to quickly and easily identify individuals potentially at risk could assist emergency responders with moving them to emergency shelters. The awards committee immediately saw how effective this kind of tool would be in their communities and spoke about wanting to replicate what you've done here in Forsyth County, the town of Kernersville, and the city of Winston-Salem in their own communities. As you know, information is one of the greatest tools you can have in responding to an emergency, and this tool obviously helps save lives, save time, and all the good things we're trying to do as public servants. So therefore, the North Carolina GIS Conference recognizes the Forsyth Cares team with the Herb Stout Local Government Award for large jurisdictions. And I'd like to again congratulate you on your vision and your willingness to invest in GIS technology for the benefit of your citizens. So would like to ask the team to come forward and so this is a cup and a plaque.
Wow.
You can have for 2 years for the next conference.
Oh.
All right.
It gets shared between the town of Kernersville.
Is there anything in the cup?
We can put things in there. As you can imagine, it was modeled loosely after the stand, but we don't hoist it around with drinks in it. So. But it has your recognition along with all those who have been recognized before. The plaque, keep permanently, and the town of Kernersville will also get a plaque. So on behalf of the North Carolina GIS Conference,
If I may, Mr. Chairman and Board, my name is Jason Clodfelter. I'm the GIS coordinator with Map Forsyth, and it's just an honor to be a part of this team. As you well know, any good, successful project is not just one person or one department. And as evidenced by the folks standing behind me, this is a representation of that. So I'd like to recognize the folks that are with me today as part of this team. First, Detective Dave Mundy with the Town of Kernersville Police. He is the one that conceptualized this entire idea. We also have Will Moore, GIS analyst with Map Forsyth, making a lot of the magic happen on the back end to secure the data and get the data to the communication centers as appropriate. Ms. Jessica Lowe from Forsyth County Emergency Services 911 Center. She actually came up with the name Forsyth Cares and the project name and acronym. And then Ashley Conrad, Forsyth County Sheriff's Office Communication Center as well. A couple folks not present with us, Lieutenant Michael Hudak from the Sheriff's Office, and Martha Hicks, who is City of Winston-Salem Police Communications, and Grant Madron, City of Winston-Salem Public Safety IT. So as you can see, multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional effort to help provide services to the citizens of Forsyth County. So I want to thank you guys for your support of the employees of Forsyth County, your commitment to continuing education and funding the training and that type of thing. That's critical for us as the technology is rapidly changing. So we thank you for that. Thank you also to the manager's office, Mr. Watts, Ms. Robinson, and Mr. Sanders Pratt. Since the inception of Map Forsyth, they have been champions for us, and we greatly appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
Tim, thank you for coming today. Appreciate you being here. That was made it special. And I'd like to thank all of our CARES team for the creativity to put together something that takes great technology and applies it yet to another, in fact, potential life-saving application, which is very good. So I'll certainly compliment Dudley Watts, our county manager, for creating an environment that kind of encourages that kind of creativity. So thanks to all of you. All righty. I'm going to turn the meeting over to County Manager Watts, and he's going to walk through our briefing items for next Thursday, the 30th.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, board members and staff and guests. Yeah, we basically are going to dive a little deeper into the business items that we have for next Thursday, but we do need to review the public hearings and the zoning matters that we have. And Chris Murphy and his team have been busy, and you've got more coming in this next cycle, so a lot going on. So I'll do an introduction for each one, and then he can dive into them. That'll give him a chance to get things set up. Item 1 is a public hearing on the zoning petition of EM Light Heirs from RS20 to RM8-S. Is zoning docket F1624. Chris Murphy.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Madam Vice Chairman, members of the commission. This is going to be a real brief presentation for me. I think we've seen this a number of times. I don't think I need to actually go over the PowerPoint again. I went over it again at your first briefing last week, and then you also heard from the town of Walkertown, and then there was a ask that the county attorney and myself determine what is reasonable. And we have had some discussions, but I will turn it over to the county attorney since that's more of a legal distinction, and get his input on that. Gordon, is this map?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Chris. At last week's meeting, the board had asked Chris and me to look into what might be reasonable in terms of any additional conditions to be placed on this possible rezoning. I heard that there were 3 additional requests from the town of Walkertown, and I have looked into those and talked with Chris about this, and then I also spoke with the attorney representing the developer on this. Any condition would have to be agreed upon by the developer to be a part of the rezoning petition. Obviously, whether it's agreed upon or not, you, the board, will have the determination as to whether you want to approve the rezoning. So going through those, the first request was to dedicate a right-of-way of property, which is across 66 from the subject property. If you look at the map that Chris has put up, you see how on the left side, it's instead of being a rectangle, there's a cutoff there where 66 is. Directly across 66 is a triangular piece of property, and that on the right side of that is Route 66. On the left side is a little loop road called Old 66 Circle. Old 66 Circle serves about 20 properties. And so what the request of the town of Walkertown was to change that. So instead of going directly north, it would cut through that triangle and would align with an entrance to this new property. So in looking at that to determine whether that was a reasonable request, first, that is not the property that is being purchased by the developer. So it would be an additional property they'd have to purchase. And second, it only serves about 20 properties, so it does not seem to be reasonable to request them to purchase additional property and have it dedicated for a road, which would take away that additional property to just change the road that only serves a few properties. So that was the first request. The second request was to realign the sidewalk, which is on that same diagonal line there on the edge of 66. What has been proposed is that a sidewalk would be built by the developers. It would be just outside the right-of-way because, as we've discussed, it's very likely that at some point 66 will be widened to account for additional traffic. And so the developer does not want to build a sidewalk that will then be torn up. So their proposal was to build it just outside of the right-of-way, but there would still be interconnectivity because there would still be a sidewalk there. The request from the town of Walkertown was that this new sidewalk align with a sidewalk which is to be built on the property directly to the northwest. And apparently that sidewalk will be built within the right-of-way or closer to the road. To me, it doesn't really make any difference where the sidewalk is built because the border between those two properties is a road. And so no matter where the sidewalks go, a pedestrian will have to cross the road. And so it doesn't seem that there would be any purpose of building a sidewalk in a right-of-way, which may very likely have to be torn up in a few years when the road is abandoned. And I don't understand the concept of them lining up because you're going to have to cross the road anyhow. So that was the second point. The third request was to commit to a certain length of turn lanes. There is already in there, there's a condition that there be turn lanes from both directions into the new development. The length of those turn lanes will have to be approved by the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And so they will look at whatever data they have before them, which very likely could include the engineering report that Walkertown submitted. And DOT will decide based on their expertise what the length of that turn lane should be. And depending on what happens between now and when they make that decision, it could increase or it could change. What the attorney for the developer has offered to do as an additional condition is they are willing to commit to a 15% increase over whatever the North Carolina DOT recommends. So, for example, if the North Carolina DOT said we need 100 feet, they would commit to building 115 feet. And so that does seem to be a reasonable condition, and they have agreed to that. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I have one comment on the second condition on the sidewalk alignment. The sidewalk in question in that northwest property adjacent to this site, it shows a sidewalk, but I'm sure that's just a rendition. That sidewalk's not yet built, correct?
I'll let Chris respond. That may be a property line. Is there a sidewalk there, Chris?
I mean, it looks like there's a little white sort of.
That's the property line.
Okay, that's the property line.
Yeah, if you notice, there's a triangular piece that's directly adjacent to this. That's where the Baton Dentist office is going to go, and then there's another parcel beside of that. So those are actually property.
So those are property lines. So it seems to me the alignment where if the developer proposes to, his plans to build the sidewalk outside of the right-of-way, but yet parallel to 66, I assume,
Yes.
not going off some other direction, then it would seem to me that the alignment could be done, in other words, at the road, not on the road, but the road on the other side where the sidewalk would join. It would seem to me that that would be pretty easy to do for the new sidewalk built on that Walkertown side property, and that the alignment could occur. Seems to me that the developer's sidewalk's going to be built first, and the alignment would come when the second sidewalk was built, and you could align it easily. So alignment doesn't need to be, the alignment applies to the other properties on that northwest adjacent properties.
That's a valid point, but in the great scheme of things, it just means when you're crossing this road, you're either going to be crossing like this, or you're going to be crossing like this. So I don't believe it's a huge barrier either way. You're going to have to cross this road, and we're only talking about a few feet. So I really don't understand the issue. But you're right, it certainly could be. It could turn up a little bit at I believe it's going to be a dental office. It could turn up a little bit there if they wanted, if alignment is important.
Well, and it would also appear to me that the sidewalk on the Walkertown side would want to be, because eventually that'll probably be 4-lane, and they would, for the same reason the developer doesn't want the sidewalk in the right-of-way, looks like that would apply to the development of the Walkertown side property. See what I'm saying?
I do, and I believe that property is within the town limits of Walkertown.
Yes,
So
right.
that would be up to them.
And that would make some sense. They could go outside, because I think I think that 4-lane road, just as the traffic study showed last week, I mean, it looks like it would be a pretty logical improvement at some point in the future. And why would you, looks like you'd make that adjustment. That makes sense to you, Chris? I mean, and I don't know what Walkertown's rules are, but it would seem to me that they would be able to affect that.
You know, essentially, I think it's going to be the person that's last in building the sidewalk is just going to need to align it.
Yeah, and it seems that the last in, well, I guess conceivably, we don't know who's going to be last in, but I don't know.
You know, and again, you have this triangular shape here, which is the parcel that this has to align to. Well, keep in mind that the sidewalk on the townhome piece is going to stop here, because they're not obviously going to put a sidewalk across this
Road,
private
sure.
drive and easement that goes back and serves that other piece. So the sidewalk is going to end here, and just as the county attorney indicated, if the sidewalk that gets eventually put in on the Baton dentist office is here, then essentially it's just going to be crossing that driveway at a perpendicular angle and going on and jumping on the sidewalk. If for some reason that sidewalk ends up in this location as its terminus, whenever you get to this point at the private road, instead of just continuing to walk this way and say, oh, the sidewalk's not there, you're going to look and see where the sidewalk is, and you're going to cross it more acutely.
I see what you're saying. Well, and obviously you can put a crosswalk in whatever direction you want, and eventually you would think.
Well, it's going to be a gravel, I mean, that's still a gravel drive, though.
It'll probably get paved one day.
Yeah, Mark.
I got it. I'm with you. Thank you.
I think it was very generous of the developer to add 15% to their road work. I appreciate that.
And that was their idea.
Yeah, because it adds about 50% to their cost, too.
Right.
Any other questions of either Chris or our attorney?
Do we know whether the dentist's office has filed its plans with the town of Walkertown? So do we know what they're planning to do?
I don't know, Chris May.
They have, but I'm not familiar with them. We have one of our staff folks serves as the planning staff for the town of Walkertown. And so it comes through our review process, but I myself have not seen it, so I can't say exactly how it aligns.
It may not make any difference to the outcome of this case, but if you can get a copy of that for us to be aware of for future reference, thank you.
Any other questions? All righty. Thank you.
All right, agenda item 2 is a public hearing and consideration of a special use permit requested by David and Betty Lawson for a land clearing and inert debris landfill and bar area. It's F-1627.
Good afternoon again. Yes, this is a request of David and Betty Lawson for an almost 74-acre site located on the east side of Piney Grove Road across from Lawson Acres Drive. And the request is for an elected body special use permit for an LCID greater than 2 acres in size and 2 borrow sites. Mr. County Attorney, do you want to go over the special use permit process again, or? Okay.
I'm not going to go over it again. I will say, as we said last week, it would be based on sworn testimony. The one thing I wanted to add, I hope everyone will be present here next week, but in our remote meeting policy, it states that you can only participate in a quasi-judicial hearing, which this is if you're physically present, because there's testimony that's heard and witnesses testifying. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. If for some reason a commissioner needs to participate remotely, they won't be able to participate in this particular hearing. Thank you.
So with that, I'll go into a little more detail on the case. This is the subject property shown on the countywide Legacy Growth Management Area Plan. It's located within Growth Management Area 5 there along one of the tributaries to Blues Lake. Again, on the east side of Piney Grove Road. This is the subject property highlighted in yellow. Again, on the east side of Piney Grove Road, you see Blues Creek there on the east side of the subject property. And you notice the LIS zoned property to the south. That is a LCID that's currently operated by the petitioner that is getting ready to close. Subject property shown on the countywide aerial imagery. You see most of the site is currently vegetated. This is looking east across Piney Grove Road towards the entrance to the subject property. This is looking west from the entrance across Piney Grove Road. This is looking north along Piney Grove Road. The entrance is further to the north. You see the sign there in the along the right-hand side of the road there. And this is looking south along Piney Grove Road. Again, the site is to the left. This is the site plan. It does show the haul road and the stormwater management erosion control devices that will be installed. It does show several areas for borrow sites, and it does show kind of a phased plan within the middle of the site where the LCID is planned to be located. In looking back at the staff report, there's a combination between the various borrow sites and the various sales for the LCID of approximately 20 acres of this 74-acre property that will be used in the operation of the LCID. This is just the site plan area showing where some stockpiles will be close to Piney Grove Road. The Board of Commissioners must find in these 4 findings that the county attorney has gone over previously. I'm not going to go over those now, again, because that is something that we will actually do in the hearing. The action that is needed is for an LCID is permitted in the RS40 zoning district with the issuance of a special use permit from the elected body following a site plan review by the planning board. The planning board reviewed and did determine that the site plan meets all UDO requirements at their February 9th, 2023 meeting. What we will do next week is hold a public hearing, and then the elected body must make a determination regarding the 4 findings. And based on how you find on those findings, then you would need to either issue or deny the special use permit request. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Chris?
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, agenda item 3 is a public hearing on an ordinance amendment proposed by Planning and Development Services staff to amend chapters 5 and 11 of the Unified Development Ordinance to add use-specific standards for pesticide, fertilizer, and other agricultural chemical manufacturing, explosives, and pyrotechnics manufacturing. It's UDO CC 17. Turn it over to Chris.
And this is what I'm not going to do a lot of additional background and information on, since we have discussed it several times over the last 2 months. I will just say that based on some concerns that were voiced at the first briefing related to the inclusion of battery manufacturing in the planning board recommended version, staff included an alternative version that eliminated battery manufacturing from the text amendment. So that was the revised version. I believe that's still in your packet and was what we actually held the public hearing on at your meeting last week. At last week's hearing, there was a vote by the commissioners to continue that for 2 weeks in order for staff to look and see if there was a way that we could revise the minimum acreage and the setbacks to see if we could get it more in keeping with, I believe, the position of some members of the county commissioners to open up some additional property to this type development if it were desired here in the county. So what we went back and did was look at the acreage, look at the setbacks, and try to determine what acreage and setback enhancement we could have that would provide an ample area to do the processing and parking and increase the number of properties that this could be done on. So when we went back and did that exercise, we discovered that 15 acres with a 200-foot setback would generate, would still keep approximately 4 acres of processing area, another 4 acres that could be dedicated to parking and circulation areas around that manufacturing facility. And in doing that, the initial 25 acres limited it within the county to 67 or 68 parcels. This 15-acre revision increased that by over 50. It took it up to right around 120 properties that would then be eligible if someone desired to do this use in the county. In doing that, we actually, and again, I didn't have a chance to talk to everyone, but I did discuss it. We've discussed it internally. I did let the county manager know. We had miscalculated on the 25 acres. And there actually was it was less than 2 acres of area that could be used for processing under the methodology that we had used. We had miscalculated our acreage. So I stand before you today saying I think if the county commissioners are going to adopt anything, we would recommend adopting the 15-acre, 200-foot setback. That's a 5-time increase over the current setback for this use. You can be as close to 40 feet to residential property today without these regulations in place. If the county commissioners were to adopt this, that 200-foot would be a 5-time increase. But again, it does leave room to actually do the the fertilizer manufacturing operations. More than likely what's going to happen is we would probably go back to the city and increase the acreage within the city and go to a higher acreage and or perhaps convince them to remove battery manufacturing to be so that we have a Winston-Salem, Forsyth County competitive, I don't want to say advantage, but basically where you can do battery manufacturing in the city and the county the same way and just hold the regulations for fertilizer in the city the way it is. I know that was long-winded, but I wanted to kind of provide some context to where we are. So again, today you have 2 versions, one that's 25 acres and 400 feet that only apply to pesticide, chemical, agricultural chemical manufacturing, and pyrotechnics. And then you have a version that also only applies to those industries, but it's 15 acres and a 200-foot setback. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions. I will just show you, this is the map. And I know those numbers are hard to see, but if you zoom in, what is in green are the properties, and again, that total does equal 120 parcels within Forsyth County's zoning jurisdiction, where the 15-acre would be eligible.
Does staff need to know which versions we agree to today, or can we wait until next week?
I'll defer to both the commissioners and the county manager. I mean, at the end of the day, again, I think I'm prepared to present it similar to the way that I did today, but if the county commissioners feel that the 15-acre is the viable option, and I think it is from a usability standpoint, again, I'll defer to the board.
Any pleasure to whether have one or just leave it and do both next time, and the hearing people could comment on either one or the other if they wanted to, if there were any folks.
And I do believe, when again, I don't know whether, did we close the public hearing last time? We did not, okay.
So I'm fine with leaving them both, but I mean, I'm also fine with the 15, if it's easier, whatever pleasure is.
If we can have both for us, that gives us the broadest option. And does not predispose us toward either one. Certainly does not predispose us toward the 25-acre minimum.
Everyone fine with having both options available?
I'm okay.
Okay. We're good. Both options available next week.
All right. All right. Agenda item 4 is a public hearing on an ordinance amendment proposed by Planning and Development Services staff to amend Chapter 9 of the Unified Development Ordinances to alleviate off-street parking requirements for restaurants in growth management areas 1 and 2. It's UDO CC 19. Chris Murphy.
Seems to be my show again.
It is.
This is a request to amend Chapter 9 nonconformities of the UDO to revise off-street parking requirements for restaurant uses in older buildings within GMAs 1 and 2. Just a little bit of a reminder on the background. In 2006, UDO 160 was approved by both the city and the county, which did provide greater flexibility for changes of use in older non-residential buildings. These provisions allow changes of use to occur in buildings constructed prior to 1968 in the county and 1988 in the city without requirements for additional off-street parking. Again, that's within GMAs 1 and 2. Only restaurant uses were still required to comply with the current UDO parking standards or seek an elected body special use permit. These uses were excluded from the parking provisions for older buildings due to concerns regarding insufficient off-street parking that could create overflow of vehicles onto adjoining neighborhood streets. As far as analysis, many businesses in GMAs 1 and 2 are located within older structures that are non-conforming to off-street parking requirements because they were sometimes built before cars, and sometimes and almost always built before the rise in prevalence of automobiles. Since 2006, there have been 7 special use permits, all within the city, that have been requested for restaurant parking exemptions. All were approved. 4 of those 7 parking exemptions have occurred since August of 2020, showing an increased interest in reusing commercial sites within the urban core of the city, because again, that's where they have been. All 7 of the special use permit requests have been approved by City Council. The proposed text amendment revises the UDO to remove the requirement for an elected body special use permit for a reduction in required off-street parking for restaurant uses in older commercial buildings. Any existing parking on site must be retained. The proposed language will simplify the approval process for applicants to establish restaurant uses in GMAs 1 and 2, which could promote more adaptive reuse of existing buildings. And again, staff does not anticipate any negative impacts. This was heard by the Planning Board at their November 10th, 2022 public hearing. There were no speakers in opposition, and the Planning Board did vote 8-1 to recommend approval of this request. This was adopted by City Council in February of 2023. You can see where those various special use permits were approved within the city. But I did want to show you the GMA map to provide the context of what GMAs 1 and 2, everything within that's either pink or salmon color within the city of Winston-Salem is GMAs 1 and 2. Of course, you have some GMA1 areas in Walkertown and Kernersville and Clemens and Louisville, all of which have their own planning and zoning authority. You do have a small area of GMA1 within Rural Hall and just a small area within Tobacconville. So that would really be the only areas that would be eligible for this if the commissioners do decide to adopt. Vice Chairman Wisenhunt, to answer your question related to last week, I did look at Bobby Boy's, and I'm sorry, I probably should not have said exactly who it was, but on, at the corner of Renolda and Robin Hood, and they actually meet the parking requirement. I think they're just so successful. They have more customers than they have parking available. But I have asked our DOT staff to take a look at the area where they're parking up on the shoulder and creating a mud hole, and asking if there's a way they can kind of address that. So
Thank you.
I did want to make sure to let you know I did look into that.
Now you get me in trouble because
Well, and again, I'm sorry, I should not have said the name, but again, we all acknowledge there's a reason why there are a lot of cars there, and that's because it's good. So anyway, with that, I'm glad to answer any questions.
Questions for Chris?
Would the changed rules apply in the non-Winston-Salem zoning and planning jurisdictions if we pass them or not?
They would only be eligible, again, I don't know how many pre-1968 buildings there are in Tobacconville. I don't think there are a lot. There could be a couple. There are some along Broad Street in Rural Hall. If the county commissioners don't adopt this, those buildings wouldn't be eligible for the parking elimination, to be able to change use without having to meet that parking requirement for the use restaurant. They can for the other uses because the commissioners have previously approved that. One of the reasons why we're bringing it to you is, again, for consistency, and again, in the offhand chance that someone would like to do that, we prefer to have tools in our toolbox to allow for adaptive reuse of buildings, because if not, they just tend to sit there. But to answer your question, those buildings in Rural Hall would not be able to take advantage of this if the county commissioners didn't adopt it. The fact that the city approved it would not help them because the city doesn't have their zoning authority, you do.
Okay. But Kernersville, Louisville, Clemens,
And Walkertown.
all will be considering this independently.
If they decide to. In other words, they would make up their own rules, but yes.
I think it's a good idea. I supported this when I was on the city council in Winston-Salem. It permits for adaptive reuse of older structures in core parts of a community, without requiring that half of the property be torn down to put up additional on spaces. As I said, I think it's a good idea. I would just like to be sure that Rural Hall and Tobacconville get a courtesy notice.
Okay.
So that they know if they have concerns, they can comment. Thank you.
Other questions?
And the last planning item, item 5, is a public hearing on the zoning amendment proposed by Planning and Development Services to amend Chapter 3 of the Unified Development Ordinances related to asphalt installation in subdivision streets, UDO CC 20.
And I think I'm to the last of my presentations, but this is a text amendment that would make it clear that the requirement for the first and bottom layer of asphalt in subdivision streets must be installed prior to the acceptance of the financial surety for the remaining infrastructure and ultimately the final plat recordation. That asphalt needs to be down prior to us signing the final plat, because signing the final plat allows the lot to be conveyed, it allows the builder to pull permits, and it allows us to issue a CO. And if we do all of those things in that final inch of that initial lift of asphalt is not installed, you've got people driving on gravel roads, and that's not what we want, and that's not what the subdivision requirements require. This amendment was requested by our interdepartmental review staff to clarify street construction requirements, which must be met prior to the signing of a final plat. It does codify existing policy to reduce potential developer confusion. Whenever this provision was changed back in the mid-2000s, we thought the language we had in there made it clear, but in a closer reading, it really doesn't. Our local development community kind of understands our process, and there haven't been any issues, but we've had some folks from out of town who have tried to get plats recorded without this being done, and they say, well, that's not what your ordinance says, and so we just wanted to make sure we cleared that up. Again, it's been policy for several years. There has been confusion among developers based in other markets thinking that the final subdivision plats could be recorded with only stone base installed over the water, sewer, and storm lines within the streets. This amendment was presented to the Quarterly Development Forum back in September. There were no questions that were raised then. We also followed that up with an email to all the folks on our Quarterly Development Forum distribution list with an email with the proposed language included. Once we had it drafted and asked them to let us know of any concerns that they had. There were no concerns that were voiced. We actually had another Quarterly Development Forum meeting today. We didn't bring that up, but again, there was no, and again, we still have not heard anything, and this is something that we're in constant communication with our development partners and have heard no concerns about this. This was, a public hearing was held by the Planning Board on December 8th, 2022. There was no opposition. Following the public hearing, the Planning Board did vote unanimously to recommend approval of this request. This was adopted by City Council in February of 2023. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Questions? Hearing none, we're good.
All right.
Thank you, Chris.
I think I have three new ones to brief you next week, maybe.
All right, very good. All right, agenda item 6 is a resolution recognizing Forsyth County's 911 telecommunicators in emergency services and the Sheriff's Office during National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. We've got some of those folks that are here. They'll be back next Thursday to get another award, and so we certainly appreciate their work and look forward to recognizing them. Item 7 are minutes. You've got approval of the minutes for the meeting on March 16th. Those will be forthcoming here shortly, and you'll get those in an email format. I've got a number of budget and finance items. Item 8 is an amendment to the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget ordinance that appropriates behavioral health reserve fund balance for transportation for security services in the behavioral health urgent care facility, which we call the BHUC. And Denise Price is going to come up and talk to you about that.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a budget ordinance to appropriate $62,500 from the Behavioral Health Reserve Fund balance for the transportation of Forsyth County residents to behavioral health needed services and for security at the BHUC. The BHUC, as you know, serves the high acuity needs of individuals experiencing crisis, and security is necessary for both the safety of employees and for the individuals that are served. Forsyth County 2022-2023 budget ordinance Appendix A would be amended to reflect an increase in the Daymark Recovery Services contract from $1 million to $1,062,500. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Denise?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Denise. All right. Agenda item 9 has a number of parts. Lee Plunkett will come up and review this. This is a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of the County of Forsyth, North Carolina, making certain statements of fact concerning proposed bond sales. We've had a lot of conversations around this strategy, and so this is sort of the first step for the bond issuance that we will have in this kind of program period that we have this year. So I'll turn it over to Lee Plunkett.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Before you now are multiple agenda items related to our upcoming general obligation bond sale that we have discussed most recently in the winter work session. And from that session, we have moved forward with a financial plan that calls for the selling of the 2/3 bonds available to you all as a county in the total of $29.22 million. The additional capacity is being provided to the schools for their projects that have been delayed due to inflationary pressures. Excuse me. So the actions that you would potentially take with these items at the upcoming March 30th meeting will officially kick off the sale process for our bonds. So the first item before you, 9A, is informally called the Findings Resolution. And in this resolution, the board is making certain statements of fact, and that is about all the proposed bonds that are getting ready to be sold. This provides the required information needed by the local government commission to help them review our application to sell those bonds. So as you know, the fourth and final tranche of the 2016 referendum bonds will be sold as well, but because those have already been approved, there will be no action needed until the next meeting, which will be April 20th, where more bond actions will be on that meeting. So this resolution states the amount and purpose of the two-thirds bonds that you're considering issuing. So $22.92 million will be for schools, of which $8.5 million of the funds will fund the biennial capital maintenance program, and then the remainder going towards the additional capacity you're going to be providing the schools as a part of the new financial plan. $2.3 million will be for Forsyth Tech capital maintenance, $2 million for Parks and Rec capital maintenance, and $2 million for general county capital maintenance. This statement of fact also includes general findings that the bonds satisfy the requirements of a sound financing enabled by proper debt, budgetary, and fiscal management policies that you all have adopted. This statement also provides for the county manager and CFO to retain the professional services needed to sell the bonds, and names our financing team, which is our bond counsel, Parker Poe, and the financial advisor, which is First Tryon. And so attached, you'll see the latest estimate for the cost of issuance as well. And finally, it also provides the confirmation from you all as a board to officially file the application with the LGC for approval to sell these bonds. Items 9B through 9E are the actual individual bond orders, and it's for each proposed issue that I described earlier. And bond orders really provide information on each of these individual issuances by purpose. And it also says that a sworn statement of debt will be filed with our clerk and then with the local government commission. And the only action needed for these bond orders is that a meeting will be introduced, or that these bond orders will be introduced publicly in the next meeting on March 30th. That's the major issue with those 9B through 9E. And so that brings us to our final item, which is 9F, and this is the resolution that calls for the public hearing, which will be held on April 20th. And it directs the clerk to publish the notice of the public hearing in our local newspapers, along with each bond order. And finally, it directs the CFO to file a sworn statement of debt and a statement of disclosure with the clerk and the local government commission, which both are required by statute. And so all these items, again, there's a lot that are before you, but essentially just kickstart the sale process. And just quickly to review, the financial plan, this is it in a nutshell. So you can see in our 2023 general obligation bond, there are two series, the 2023A and the 2023B. So the 2023A are two-thirds bonds. And so we have four different purposes: schools, Forsyth Tech, Parks and Rec, and then just general county. And so those first four rows you'll see are our biennial capital maintenance program. So what every other year that we issue to provide for our capital maintenance projects. And that fifth line, which is the school's additional capacity, that is what's part of the financial plan that has come out of the work session and then conversations with you all in the school board. And so you can see in the very last column there, I just wanted to show where that is the increase over the original plan that was out there. So the $16.8 million is what is going to be available to the schools specifically from the two-thirds bond series. The bottom section is the 2023B series, which are the 2016 referendum bonds. The two purposes there are schools and Forsyth Tech. And you can see at the far right, from that sale, there will be additional $21.4 million available to them in additional capacity. And so bringing the total additional capacity available is $38.2 million. And these are from the sale that's coming up soon. And then I just wanted to make you aware of some other notable dates. And so obviously March 30th is the next meeting where you will take action on these two resolutions. But we'll also be submitting our application to the local government commission for approval of our two-thirds bond sale. April 20th will be the next meeting where you all actually approve the sale of the bonds, both the 2/3 and our referendum bonds. And then April 21st, the 2/3 bond orders will be published in local newspapers. And that will start the 30-day challenge period where there can be a petition to bring those to a vote if desired. May 2nd is our LGC meeting where the 2/3 bonds will be approved, and then May 23rd will be pricing and selling the bonds to the best price of the underwriters that bid on those bonds. And then June 13th and 14th, we'll receive the bond proceeds, and we'll start, those will be available to use. I know that's a lot, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
I have one just general question. In terms of as our prime rate has continued to go up 1.25 yesterday, what is kind of the relationship with the bond sale rate? Is it lagging? Does it impact it very much on the general obligation bonds? I'm just kind of curious. It may not be tied as closely. Is it? How closely is it tied?
No, I think you're going in the right direction. It's not tied as closely as other markets would be. I think the most recent from our FA was still around 3.5%, which is what we had modeled it at. So, but I'll check again just to make sure, see where they're at, and see where they think it's going to move for the next meeting.
Lee, is it true that, when, as interest rates go up, when interest rates were really low, that tax advantage piece was somewhat less meaningful in some ways. So as the interest rate goes up, actually, investors look a little bit differently at the tax advantage. And then just the perceived safety and security of the financial markets, which is something that I think the world's dealing with right now too. So, let me just add, because I spoke with the superintendent last night and also the CFO for the schools and asked them specifically about their board's sort of endorsement of this financial plan. And so they said they could not be here today, but they will be. I know superintendent will be here, and I think the CFO will be here next Thursday, and they are working towards that, getting that board. Obviously you've got a large board, you got a lot of different opinions by different board members about things, and I think that what they are working on is really a letter of support that they would sign for this financial plan, which includes how you stagger issuances and all that. So that's coming, and we'll get that. The other issue is the extra, the par amount issue in here. Can you mention that? Just
it's not in these items. It'll be in the items on April 20th, but we can talk about it now. So we initially talked about from the referendum bonds, selling as much as possible without impacting the tax rate. And so based off the most recent modeling, it was, I think, $100 million in the par amount. Well, there's some additional capacity to sell even more. And so our FA suggested you want to raise that amount to $105 million. The purpose being, if for some reason the market changes, rates drop even more, and there's additional capacity, that we could sell just a slight bit more, but always limited by our tax rate impact, where there would be no tax rate impact whatsoever. It just provides a little bit of extra cushion in case something changed in the market and allow us to sell at a lower rate.
Dudley, do you know if the superintendent, if the board plans to endorse our entire plan, which is the next bond referendum in 2028?
Words matter, as you all know, and so I think endorsing it from a financial plan perspective, I'm hopeful that language seems better than saying absolutes that we are not going to bring you something or will bring you something at a different time. And so I think collapsing it into endorsement of a financial plan. Obviously, if things go haywire and something changes, then you maybe have to re-examine the financial plan. But I'm hopeful they'll be able to get good support from that.
Well, that's very important to me. If I choose to support the first part of this plan, it's dependent on their agreement also on the bond referendum.
And the date where that all kind of comes to a head is when?
So we can still, for example, if you all voted that 29.22 million was the max amount, and then we decided to issue less, you can do that still. It's going to be probably at the end of April. I have to double check the range on that. It's depending on when our official statement goes out to investors. But at that point, they want to know exactly how much, or pretty close to how much in the bar we're going to issue. So you have a little bit of time before that officially goes out into the market to be marketed to investors.
And I think the key is they owe us a lot of information around facilities, condition of facilities. They're doing their facility condition assessment. They've got enrollment factors to consider in that. So, I think there'll be sort of a continual conversation as that information comes, and we can get that. So we really, in April, we will have a morning session, and maybe that morning session needs to include the most current information from them about their facility assessment piece. So.
Yeah, and I don't want to muddy the water myself. You've already pretty much spoken to that, but we've been waiting a long time for a lot of the budgets coming from the school board, and I definitely need that information to make better choices in terms of decisions.
Absolutely.
So I hope that they're listening. Thank you.
Any other questions for Lee?
All right.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Thank you.
We'll be seeing a lot of you here lately. So, all right. All right, we have 3 ARPA projects. We're narrowing down on the contracts. So Aisha is going to come up and talk about 3 of them today. Item 10 is a resolution approving execution of an agreement with Work Family Resource Center Incorporated. It supports new licensed family child care homes with American Rescue Plan Act funds. And I'll turn it over to Aisha.
Thank you, County Manager. Good afternoon, County Commissioners. Work Family Resource Center. This agenda item will provide ARPA funding to Work Family Resource Center, Inc. in the amount not to exceed $221,185 to increase the availability of local child care by supporting the recruitment and startup of 20 new licensed family child care homes in Forsyth County. Funding will be used to ensure that potential family child care providers across Forsyth County, with a focus on recruiting individuals in disproportionately impacted communities, are provided the support they need to license and operate their new family child care business. Any questions in regards to that? Yes, ma'am.
Questions?
Are there any expectations that these new, ideally licensed family child care homes would be in alignment with the pre-K priority expectations of trying to make sure there's universal consensus in Forsyth County around how we are setting standards for pre-K?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure, but I could follow up with that.
Because I know that's kind of one of the major challenges in, really any community, making sure that there is a standard that's preparing pre-K to come into K-12.
Yeah,
I would not like to waste the opportunity to make sure that those folk that this organization is bringing in are not familiar with what our standards are.
Okay.
Well, I can at least speak to the Workforce Family Center. They were very involved in the pre-K and basically the year-long study that produced the plan for pre-K, basically evaluation and really equity across all pre-Ks. So I know that they're very aware of that, and what they're really trying to do here is get some childcare capabilities that are not, these are not 6-hour-a-day programs. These are not pre-K centers. These are childcare centers.
Yeah, in
for a shorter
homes.
period of time.
Yeah, it's really capacity issues.
Actually, somebody behind us that might have a.
I'm Tina Peck, Program Director, Family Resource Center. We do work with our licensed family child care programs on quality and on the quality of programming that they are providing for the children in their care. We are very familiar with and do the professional development for the this pre-K priority project in private child care centers that will be participating in that program. So we know those standards. We have coaches that work specifically with our licensed family child care. What we typically do is as we bring the individuals in, start these new businesses, then there is a lot of just the basic licensing and running a business that they need to get under their belt. And as they do that, then we work with them on their star rating, and then we work with them on curriculum, and we work with them on building on the quality that they can provide to the families that they are providing care for. This particular project, as Mr. Martin spoke to, is really about building capacity of childcare, licensed childcare in our community, because right now, when families are trying to get back to work, they are frequently running into waiting lists. There's just not enough care in licensed programming in the county to meet the need.
And I appreciate you sharing comprehensively what the child care component means versus maybe per se a pre-K program. But what I will say, just speaking, I think maybe more from a commonsensical standpoint, that anytime you have children in a space where you're taking care of them, you're educating them, and it's best to do it according to the way we know the brain works and how we can not continue to spin our wheels moving in the wrong direction around literacy. So I would just submit that there is or should be careful consideration around making sure that as long as we have, some kind of influence and support to these individual care centers for children, that we, provide them with whatever support we can to meet those educational standards with the children.
Right. And our intent with this is that as we bring these new individuals in and we help them become a licensed caregiver, that they will continue to work with our organization and with our coaches on the various types of professional development that we have available for them. And that really does grow their ability and their understanding of the children's development and how to best meet those developmental needs with young children. And so as these new 20 individuals become licensed and start their new business, they will continue over time to work with our coaches. And those coaches go in and they're on site with them. They help model behaviors for them. They help to introduce curriculum and ways of utilizing curriculum with a multi-age classroom, and continue to help those individuals grow in their understanding and ability to meet the developmental needs of children.
Thank you.
Great. Short question. I thought I recalled that there was the Work Family Resource was rebranding as Child Care Resource Center.
We are Work Family Resource Center doing business as Child Care Resource Center.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I
I
wasn't.
think I even
confused.
said workforce, and I said it wrong too.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Good, thank you.
Agenda item 11 is a resolution approving execution of an agreement with CARE doing business as Delicious by Shireen to provide workforce development training to refugee women with American Rescue Plan Act funds. Aisha.
Thank you. This agenda item will provide ARPA funding to CARE operating as Delicious by Shireen in the amount not to exceed $25,000 to train and empower 4 to 8 additional Forsyth County refugee women in English as a second language, in personal financial management and budgeting, communication skills, and civics and government to help them prepare to become lawful citizens and independent entrepreneurs. Any questions in regards to that?
Any questions?
Yep.
One question, and if I have missed reading this, I apologize. Refugee has a legal term of art meaning, and I didn't know if it was being used in that context here.
The legal term for refugee?
Refugee, yes.
Oh, that one, no clue. I know these are women that are not English-speaking women. But other than that, I do not know the definition that they're using for refugee.
Basically, there's a national program to assist people who are admitted as refugees in that specific legal category,
Okay.
which is active here in the Triad. And it's entirely, it's entirely likely that they could be talking about in this particular program, assisting folks who have been settled in Forsyth as a part of that refugee resettlement program.
So is your question asking, is these individuals a part of that program as well?
I would be interested to know. I don't think it's dispositive on whether this is a good program or not.
Okay.
But it would provide information in terms of explaining who was benefiting from a particular program.
Do you know the name of that program?
It's the refugee resettlement program. I'm trying to remember the Triad area
It's global,
affiliate.
yeah.
World Relief.
World Relief.
Triad. Thank you.
I
And
will
we could
check
have
on
that
it.
maybe by next week, we get that answered, and I agree that'd be helpful to know
Yeah, every one of these went through a legal compliance piece of it, and so I think the question was probably addressed there to make sure that we were using federal funds appropriately for folks who had legal work status. So we'll definitely double check that piece and make that connection.
Sure. I mean, there are other categories of legal immigrants who are sometimes referred to as shorthand refugees, but that's the colloquial reference is broader than the specific reference, and so if the relevance here, for example, would be if I'm telling people about a new program. Do I tell them it applies specifically to this, particular group, or to, several groups of legally, resident immigrants? So, thank you.
Look at that.
No problem. I will make sure I have that information before the meeting.
Thank you.
Good.
Any other questions in regards to Delicious by Shireen or CARE?
All right. Item 12 is a resolution approving execution of an agreement with Hands On Northwest North Carolina for nonprofit training and support with American Rescue Plan Act funds. Aisha.
So this agenda item will provide ARPA funding to Hands On Northwest North Carolina in the amount not to exceed $63,810 to underwrite spaces for 50 unduplicated small grassroots or medium-sized nonprofits working with vulnerable populations, which include low-income, marginalized, and under-resourced communities, to attend either their Women's Emerging Leaders Program or the Volunteer Engagement Training Program that they have. Both programs will be offered in 2023 and 2024 and market specifically to small grassroots and medium-sized nonprofits. Any questions in regards to that one?
Any questions? We're good.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Aisha. Do you remember how many offhand we got left to bring on the round two?
I have 5 more left to present to you guys, so wrapping up.
All right. Very
Thank you.
good. Thank you. All right. We have some contract matters. Item 13 is a resolution authorizing the execution of a contract between Forsyth County and McNaughton, a division of Brodart Company, for leased books. And I think Laura Luck and Scott Bullock and yeah, everybody can come. So, all right.
There are a few of us here. I'm fine if you want to. Good, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is, the library is asking for a consideration, authorization for a contract between us and McNaughton, which is a division of Brodart, to provide us with leased books for the library and our users. These leased books provide bestsellers, high demand, while they're in demand, and allow us to return them without having to keep them on the shelves or have no way of disposing of them after their demand has waned. The contract is for $236,577.24 with tax. It's $221,100 without tax, which has not gone up since 2020.
Yeah, the last increase was fiscal year 2020. This will be consistent with those prices. The original quote that we received was for the $236,000. That's why it's listed here. We met earlier this week with Brodart, and turns out that the person who provided us the quote was fairly new and inexperienced, and they included tax in that quoted price to us. So when we remove that tax, the actual contract will be quoted at the same price we have for the last few years. Which is $1,000.
This contract was a planned expenditure for the fiscal year 23, and the funds are available.
I have two quick questions. The first one is a curiosity question, and it has to do with Libby, with the Kindle kind of downloads. Does this count in your total? Because I've gone on to get in the list for bestsellers, and there may be 12 copies and 300 people in line. I'm curious, does this, whatever number of copies you may list of a bestseller, is it also available through Kindle that way?
These are physical books only. We have separate expenditures for digital materials. So these are for
people want to hold the book in their hand.
Right, the New York Times bestsellers, Publisher Weekly, that sort of thing. We do purchase those in digital content as well. However, they're usually 3 to 5 times the expense in digital for one book, and therefore we cannot purchase as many, and they don't offer leasing for that. So, yes.
And the second question is, this is a pretty special, is there a competitor, for Brodart and for McNaughton?
There are 3 major book vendor companies for libraries: Brodart, Baker & Taylor, and Ingram. Ingram does not offer a leasing plan whatsoever. Baker & Taylor has a plan, but it is not, it's like comparing apples to oranges. It doesn't exactly lease. What they do is they sell you the books, and then they offer a chance for a second contractor to buy the books off you if they want them.
Yeah. So our strategy going into this year is to, I think this is a 1-year deal. So dive into it and actually, it's a different kind of bid. It's really a service, and so basically take a look at that marketplace here in the fall. And so we're just really continuing what we've done the last couple of years. We did look at it in that broad fashion several years ago, and so we made a decision to do that one more time, and then in this year we'll take another look at it. So you'll see it back this time next year probably.
Okay, other questions?
It is, one thing that I had learned through that whole thing is it is odd and does not completely follow that the digital book would be more expensive. And that has always baffled me
It's
personally.
the way publishers get their money.
Yeah. It's crazy that the digital piece would
That
be
simple.
more expensive, but.
But if you look at their cost, the cost is in that hard copy book,
Yeah.
and that they sell for X amount of money, and the digital version can't be as expensive to them.
We buy the average James Patterson, for example, for about $20 in a physical book. They're $65 in a digital format, and that is for one user to use at one time.
It's crazy.
Hard copies.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we try to keep a 5-to-1 ratio for every 5 people on hold. We keep one book on the shelf, or we try to meet that. In physical, we cannot meet that in the digital with our current budget.
Wow.
Keep that in mind.
Wow, that's interesting marketing, pricing, what the market will bear, if you will. Wow. Although I as a user of those Kindle versions, boy, there's nothing easier than that.
Right, and the individual can buy it for a lot less, but libraries are kept to those prices.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, that, it makes when you can turn that book, 300 times in a library over 2 years, I guess they sort of put libraries as the physical place you go get the book, and then, that's the way that one works.
I'm thinking through it a little bit more. It makes a little more sense with the idea that hard copy book, you would buy more hard copies probably to satisfy demands, simply because you're not buying as many, so we better have more expense than the Kindle one.
We do.
Particularly if they were cheaper, then it would be even, and I can kind of, sort of see it, but anyway, I'm sorry to waste time. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. The only question that I would have, I'm coming on to the board soon, so I could wait for this question. If you don't have the answer, that's fine as well. But one of the things that I would like to know is how are the books selected? Like who selects, like what division?
That's me.
Okay, fair enough.
That's why I'm up here talking to you. However, I do consult with all the librarians in the system for their wants and needs for their customers. It also depends on what Brodart or any of the companies would allow as a leased book, because that's usually just high-volume bestsellers, not just any book on a bookstore shelf.
I will say that you've done a great job. I take my grandbaby often to the libraries, so we go to each one so that she can have that experience. And I've seen various books, so I appreciate you having a
It's a group effort.
section. Pardon me?
It's a group effort. Librarians throughout the system do a fantastic job.
Okay, thank you.
For whatever it's worth, while I increasingly feel like an escapee from Jurassic Park, in my dedication to holding a book in my hands and subscribing to a daily paper in print version, there, especially in the book department, there is something to be said for being able to have the physical book. I have to spend more than enough time staring at a screen for work every day. I don't want to do that when I've got
I agree.
I've got a book to read.
I thought I got to where I couldn't read a regular holding book with my eyesight, and I could read the Kindle, and boy, it opened the door, and I was amazed how easy I adjusted to that, because I used to be just like you. I think if you try it, surprisingly enough, it's pretty easy.
I'll try to get more.
What was that again?
The print book is not dead. Our circulation numbers are.
Well, that's good. Well, that's good.
All right.
Sorry, we got off on our personal reading preferences, but anyway, good. Thank you. Appreciate the report and being here.
Options are good, right?
That's right. Good.
Just a reminder, we love our libraries, so that's
right.
Thank you all for making them great. Item 14 is a resolution authorizing the execution of amendment to an agreement between Forsyth County and Vanguard Professional Staffing Incorporated for temporary child welfare staff. Krista Smith.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a request for an amendment to a contract that we have with Vanguard Professional Staffing Incorporated. The amendment would increase the contract by $26,000 to a not-to-exceed amount of $75,000 just through the end of this fiscal year, so through June 30th, 2023. The agreement includes 50% in federal funding and 50% in county funding. To let you guys know, we are using these staff. They are a specialty staffing service, and they provide pre-service trained child welfare social workers to us. We were relatively certain that we were going to need to ask you guys for a sole source exemption, but we did a kind of a scan of the industry anyway, and checked with the resource company, did a search online for social work staffing agencies, and so that's kind of where we came up with this list. Checked with PPS Professional Staffing, Jobel Staffing, TRC Staffing Services. All of them said they did not offer temporary social work assignments. They were placement services. They could provide us with referrals for our job openings. And we checked with Randstad Staffing, and they did not return a request for an informal quote. So at this point, we are requesting permission from the Board of Commissioners for a sole source exemption. Let's see. I think that's all I have to share with you guys, but I'm available for any questions that you have.
You might want to mention, we are actually having a little more success on the recruitment side, and so hopefully, there's been some really great work done. I don't know if Chantel or Christy, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
I'm happy to share. So I ran our numbers back in January. Our CPS vacancy rate was about 50%, and our foster care was at about 55%. Since then, our Human Resources Department has worked together with our program staff, and they've held 3 one-day, on-the-spot interview job fairs, and with a lot of success. The downside is that we're bringing on people that do need to go off to that pre-service training, and it's 3 weeks of training, and this is happening across the state. The state provides this training, and so those trainings are just kind of maxed out. So we have some people that we're bringing on board. They're able to help us with some tasks, but they aren't able to actually do child welfare work until they come back from that training.
Yeah, that really did strike me when I read that, because it sounds to me like, I assume this is DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, providing the training.
Correct.
To have to wait 4 to 5 months to get critical training on a new employee is causing us to spend a whole lot more money when we would not have to if these trainings were more available. And it would seem to me, is this training not online?
So during COVID, they kind of converted to online for most everything. They've really gone back to classroom as the primary source of this training, but they are offering it kind of hybrid. So a few days of the 3-week training is offered virtually now, but they are back in the classroom.
Well, that's kind of really unacceptable. That's just not, here we're in a crisis across the state.
Absolutely.
A 6-month wait, we're struggling to hire social workers to meet a demand. We're out here hiring temporary workers with specialty, credentials to come and work for us. And not only are we hiring them, we're now going to spend $75,000 more to get through this year. And yet we've been able to hire some people, and we have a backlog because we can't get 3 weeks of training accomplished in less than 6 months. Does that strike anybody as a little ridiculous?
It's a challenge for sure.
I appreciate the challenge versus ridiculous, but any other questions? I'll be quiet.
I do, Chairman. So with all of the challenges that you're having, don't mean to add an additional one, and you probably don't know this one either, but when they were hired with DSS, was there some type of, with HR, was there some type of an agreement that they would need to stay for a year, 2 years, 5 years after they've received our training and commitment?
I can answer that question. No, ma'am, there is none. The training through the state is free as far as I'm aware, but there is no sort of agreement for employees that they have to stay.
So is that not something that we should be thinking through in the future?
We've done that for some areas, for EMT training that we've paid for. We've done that on the BLET side for law enforcement and detention. We can't, there's nothing that they're paying, so we're not necessarily losing out. I'll also say, when individuals, even when we have agreements, when they don't stay, we also don't have a collection service. So while we may put it in their offer letter that they have to stay, that also creates a little bit of a challenge. But there would be nothing for them to, quote unquote, really pay back.
No. I get that in terms of them not having to pay anything, but still yet the commitment for them to come, and we're providing all these services for them. I think that it's just something that we should probably look back into. Yeah.
Well, aren't they getting paid while they get the training?
Yeah.
And aren't we paying? Haven't we
Oh,
employed
absolutely.
them?
They're getting a paycheck. That is
to go be
correct.
trained. So that's a loss of productivity and time and et cetera. We made an investment. We've waited 6 months for it. I think that those
That
kind of
is
things
fair.
do make a difference.
I will say it is my understanding the state has opened up more trainings, so we should not be waiting 6 months anymore. Still not as quickly as we would like. And also trying to get more trainings here locally. I know our DSS director has been working with them to see if they could start offering more pre-service trainings even here in Forsyth County, where we would be a regional hub for people. So there is some progress, or at least some ask out in that area. The other thing I will say is even with that, we would still need Vanguard. Our vacancies are still really high. So regardless of the training issue, we still have quite a few. But the on-the-spot interviews and hiring has helped. In January, we hired 15 social workers, February 7, and last week 10. So we're making some progress, but we also have to do a good job on the retention side, keeping the people that we have. And I know that Krista and team are working hard on that.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for, the retainment piece.
Other
I've
questions?
seen a lot. It's going back and forth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kristen. All right, item 15 is a resolution authorizing execution of a change order to Contract Business Solutions, Inc. for furniture for the new courthouse project. Damon.
Thank you, Mr. Manager and Chairman and Commissioners. So the item before you is a resolution authorizing execution of a change order with Contract Business Solutions for additional furniture for the courthouse project. On December 15th, the board adopted a resolution awarding a contract to Contract Business Solutions for $1,283,388.74. And at the time of that bidding and award, a design for the Clerk of Court estates had not been finalized. So after significant review and discussion with the Clerk of Court, it was determined that the Government Center was not a suitable location for estates. We were going to separate their estates division here, but there were adjacencies that they needed and the money transfers that didn't work by putting it in this facility. So we ended up putting it in the courthouse, which is why this furniture plan was later. So following completion of the design, a cost proposal was solicited from Contract Business Solutions to provide the additional furniture for 16 staff. The cost proposal also included credits for conference tables, which were deleted from the project on the 4th and 5th floors. So those tables were deleted because one of the rooms is turned into a remote video conferencing room, so they're using built-ins in that room. And then another one is a back-of-house space for the Clerk of Court, so they won't need a conference table there. Contract Business Solutions submitted a change order request in the amount of $16,969.46, but increased their total contract amount to $1,300,358.20. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
How long will it be before we can go into the courthouse with our cameras and take a picture of all of that material in the completed courthouse?
So they hope to be done with their construction piece before we go in and see what's wrong with it early summer.
I'm just trying to get you to tell me when it's available, the whole thing.
So we're going to punch it, and we expect to get a new building. So if there are issues with it, we're going to make sure those are resolved first. So there are 2 periods of time that work well for the court system to move, but they're basically not having court for a week. And so the one that will fit is in October. So likely that's when we'll actually move in everything in October. But we'll start punching it.
This coming
right.
October?
That's right.
Oh, gosh, that's exciting.
I'll just say I'm extremely disappointed that the Clerk of Court made the decision not to keep a division here in the courthouse, in the Government Center.
So there were some adjacencies that they talked about with their staff that made it inconvenient, but
It was
I registered
convenient for citizens.
I'll second that, too. I agree. I'm disappointed, too. I think it's a very convenient space, personally. Any other questions for Damon?
Thanks, Damon. All right. Agenda item 16 is a resolution consenting to the execution of a sublease agreement between Partners Health Management and Daymark Recovery Services Incorporated for county-owned property at 650 Highland Avenue, and Kirby Robinson will review.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Board. Appreciate the opportunity to bring this to you today. The board is probably aware there are 3 tenant organizations in the Highland Avenue Center that's located at 650 Highland Avenue. You have Daymark Recovery Services, occupies the vast majority of the facility. You have what we call the clinic, which is essentially Novant. I think it's called Forsyth Community on the contract. And then you have Partners. A couple weeks ago, the board authorized a lease of the social services facility to Partners, which allows them to move from the Highland Avenue Center over to DSS for a temporary period of time. This consent allows a portion of Daymark to move into that partner suite, and that makes way for the planned renovations at the Highland Avenue Center. So the sublease is consistent with the terms the board originally approved for partners at the space. I'm happy to answer any questions the board has.
Questions for Kirby?
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Kirby. All right, you've got a number of appointments, items 17 through 27. Those will close or closed, I guess.
They closed Monday.
Okay, so we'll get all those in front of you. And then item 28 is an ordinance. It's an ordinance revising Chapter 6 of the Forsyth County Code entitled Animals. And our animal expert, Damon Sanders Pratt, is going to review this, who, by the way, does not have a cat or a dog, but...
Hey, Damon.
I used to.
Used to. All right.
We just got at the Plyler household a 10-week-old little Shih Tzu who thinks he is the king of the world. Just want you to know I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Mr. Chairman, again, and Commissioners, we've had to make some Chapter 6 revisions, which is the chapter on animals in the code, because we had an animal control department that had two divisions, one being shelter care and the other being enforcement. So now the enforcement division is located in the Sheriff's Department, and the shelter care division is going to be under the Health and Human Services umbrella, though I still got it. All right. This kind of says that again. On April 1st, Animal Services Enforcement will remain with the Sheriff's Office. Care and custody will be housed in Health and Human Services. Chapter 6 has been revised to reflect that. Some notable revisions that you'll see, that there's a number of them. Some of them are just nomenclature to replace Animal Control Department. The director definition was added when the Sheriff's Office started doing enforcement because the captain had to be made as the director, where the director is referenced in the code. So we've deleted that. So now, just by default, the County Animal Services director will be the director. Okay, so we deleted that added definition. We've defined County Animal Services Division, which is the shelter care part, separate from FCSO, which is the Sheriff's Enforcement Division. So you'll see that throughout the code, a reference to County Animal Services Division, which is the care and custody, shelter part, and then FCSO, which is the enforcement piece. And then we've also added a definition for rescue partner, although in practice, we've always used rescue partners, but it basically speaks about live release options as redemptions and adoptions, and it doesn't reference rescue partners because we never had that before. So we've added that so that it's something that we already do it, but we've added that. In section 6.3 and 6.4, talks again broadly about what the Sheriff's Office will be doing with respect to field enforcement services and then the attendant record keeping, and also talks about the County Animal Services shelter care part and the record keeping that goes with that. Section 610, 653, and 658, where animals are declared as dangerous dogs or guard dogs, they used to have to be registered with the animal shelter director. Now you're registering that with the Sheriff's Office, the enforcement piece. In sections 616 through 618 and 659 through 660, authorizes public health and the Sheriff's Office to declare animals as dangerous dogs and then to implement the measures that go with that. The existing code, again, lists the Animal Control Department. Section 627 is something that's been revised between the Sheriff's Office, Public Health, as well as the county's Animal Control or Animal Services Division. And so that allows people to quarantine an animal that's bitten at home, which is at the Sheriff's Office discretion, if they've ever been vaccinated. So if an animal's ever been vaccinated, at least once, and it bites, right now it has to be quarantined at the shelter, which can lead to overcrowding in some instances where there is an animal that can be adequately sheltered at home. Now we have to bring them all to the shelter. When it gets overcrowded, then we have challenges there. So this allows the Sheriff's Office to allow people to quarantine their animals at home. Also, 627 defines an inconsequential bite as one that could still allow an animal to be adopted, whereas today, for any bite, we can't adopt the animal out. So if somebody stepped on an animal's tail and it kind of bit to get away, but it's not an aggressive bite, we still couldn't adopt it the way the code's currently written. Now we will be able to, because we've added inconsequential bite. In section 657, right now, if you wanted to appeal the prevention measures or citations issued or fines, that goes to the captain. He has the final appeal. So you have an advisory board, you go before them, and then they'll make a written decision to the captain of the enforcement division, who will then make the final decision on that. So we're switching that to the county animal services director, who is a civilian. So it used to be a civilian before who was over both law enforcement and shelter care. Then we separated them. And so the only animal services piece that we had was law enforcement. But you basically had the law enforcement captain hearing the appeals of the law enforcement workers in the field. Now we'll basically have the law enforcement decisions in the field being reviewed by a civilian. So that's another change that's notable that you'll see.
Damien, I have a question. Can you go back to that slide real quick? How many appeals have we had to, can you determine that we've met on in the last year or so?
Well, I don't know that off the top of my head. I can get that, but I can tell you I've been to their appeals hearings, and at times they hear from 10 to 15. Sometimes they get backed up, because they need to have enough for people to be available to hear them. And you're not supposed to wait but so long, but they were having trouble getting volunteers at some point. Now, they're doing better now. They're keeping up, but it can be a number.
So has there ever been, and maybe so or maybe not, in the past, when the advisory board made a decision, then the captain came back and decided something else different? How often does that happen?
Very infrequently.
Okay. That's
hardly at all.
To know what the culture felt like. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
And that's all I've got. You'll see a number of other things in the code, but they're mostly de minimis changes.
I have kind of one question sort of for the board as well as you. Would we want to like codify how we're going to calculate the euthanasia rate in a sense? I mean, and that we would report annually. I mean, I think that's something that we don't need any, it needs to be like spelled out and what numerators, denominators, time periods, just how that's going to be and how that makes sense to calculate. It's a little more complicated than just a little simple rate. Right. Because I think there's a lot of measurement to that at least some of the public will want to hold us accountable for, and it would be nice if we had something in writing, kind of codified here that said, annually we will report from the shelter services this rate and describe it, define it, and how it would be. It just seems to me that's something that'd be helpful for us to have.
And that makes sense.
And this is the place you can put it.
That's true. We could put it in here. The only challenge with that is that the true euthanasia rate is really a community euthanasia rate, where we would take all the animals that were live release or fostered that were not euthanized and add that to the denominator.
Well, I think the definition should include them. If they have crossed our doors, and then they count, they were with us. And if we were able to place a group that goes to Canada, and a group that does this, and a group that does this, then those are like successful. Right. I mean, we don't know what happens to them, but we did not euthanize them. So it seems to me that percentage is of those that are euthanized, the number euthanized of all of the animals that come in, that ever cross the door into our shelter are in that denominator. Mm-hmm. And if we define that and make it clear, then we're not going to be arguing over these calculatable rates.
Right. Yeah. And I think that we do that for our rate. Like we know our animals, we'll include that in the denominator. But the bigger challenge is like right now, through our arrangement with the Humane Society, we have their animals coming to our shelter and we have our animals coming. When they leave, they're going to take just adoptable animals. We'll be left with all the ones that are not.
So that's why we need to keep all the animals in our denominator.
Right. And so to do that, I need to know their number. Like once we're separated, so I can have the true denominator of animals that were saved in the community, not just that came to the shelter.
Yeah, I don't think the state's going to let us calculate the animals that go to the Humane Society in our denominator in that reporting. What we want to do is in a community report, we hope that we can say, what the community euthanasia rate, given that the Humane Society does, they if you've got a dog that you just can't keep in your home anymore, you can take it to them. If it's very adoptable, they may very well take it. If not, then bring it to us, and it goes. It's it's just a different, the community rate would include the ones who go through their door but never go through ours. And that, because that is the calculation, since there's really one intake center now. When the Humane Society ran it, there was one intake center, so that's what the math reflected. When they start accepting animals other than ours, that's where it's going to get a little more confusing. Now, the animals we ship to them will be in our denominator, but not ones that the community chooses to take.
For example, though, if 100 dogs are sent to Canada, which could happen, you know, well, we're not going to have any accountability on anything, so we need to count them as that they crossed our doors. What you're arguing is within the county, if another 100 dogs go to the Humane Society, then they're going to account and share with us in this community rate. Well, we received this many, and this is what. And of course, they're not going to do the euthanasia. They're going to send them back to us anyway to do it. They don't do it, right?
Yeah, they're going to.
So the euthanasia rate, like our rate, we do include in the denominator animals that we transfer. So that's a category, is transfer.
Okay.
We do include that.
You'll pick up all the animals that we are able to take to, out of state or something, that come through our doors.
Right.
The only thing we're going to be missing is the ones that the community takes to them, that they actually in turn adopt.
So there's 100% just about save rate for Orphan Forever Friends and different organizations, 100%, but we don't get credit at all for that.
Does there seem to be
now we are.
Does there seem to be some advantage in simply codifying what that is? Apparently, we have to report this statewide to the state. Do they have some kind of definitional issues? I'd love to see that.
They probably don't have a community definition, or they'll have it by facility. And, the irony there is the state requires public shelters to report it, but does not require nonprofit shelters to report it at all.
There's no penalty, so sometimes they don't.
Well, I think animals. Well, I'm assuming the state their report title is community rate. Is a community rate. Is that their title?
Facility. It'd be facility.
This facility. Well, in that case, we don't. Then back to what I said at the beginning seems to work, because the animals that go to the Humane Society never darken our doors. So
if you go directly to the Humane Society.
What's this what?
If you go directly to the Humane Society, like if they come to us first and we transfer them to the Humane Society, then that counts in our denominator.
Yes.
If you take your dog directly to them, it doesn't count in our number.
And we don't care about that.
That gives you your community euthanasia rate. Like right now, what you're seeing today at that 70% number, that's all the animals, not just that come to us.
If they adopt 100% of their animals and we adopt 60% of our animals, if you can take the animals that went straight to them, obviously the community euthanasia rate is going to be lower. If we could pick up their animals that flow through their shelter. What we hope that Humane Society and Forever Friends and empty our shelters out.
Great. So we need to count the transfers in our denominator. And I think, I'll go back to my original question, is it a good idea to capture that in this document?
We can define it.
We'll do this, this is how we're going to do it, and we'll report it in.
Mr. Chairman, my recommendation would be that would be more properly suited to a resolution rather than an ordinance. The ordinance is the law that applies to the community as to how we handle animals. We could certainly put something like that in the ordinance, but I believe it would be better in a resolution, because that is going to be a number that is going to evolve in terms of how it's calculated as we try to figure out what the best way of calculating that is.
Well, then you change the ordinance.
Well, and generally you don't want to be changing your ordinance too often, but that's obviously up to the board.
I don't believe this can be settled this afternoon. I think this is something that needs to be talked about further with staff recommendation.
We can make a run at it. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Any other questions for Damon? I have no more.
All right, thanks, Damon. All right. So you got two tax administration items. They're both refunds, 29 and 30, and you'll see those. And then liquidity services operations sold asset report. That's where we actually report back to you how the sales through our sales vendor, whose name escapes me right this minute. So anyway, so you'll see that report in there as well. And that is it, Mr. Chairman. The only other thing I have is closed session motion. Anything else?
Okay.
Ready for me? All right. Need to ask the board to consider a motion to go into closed session to discuss a matter to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer, an employee, or prospective public officer or employee pursuant to the provisions of General Statute 143, 31811A6. And since there's no business to come before the board at this meeting, following the closed session, the meeting will be adjourned.
Move we adjourn, Mo, and go into closed session.
Second. Very good.
So moved.
I'll second it and adjourn.